This is the Exposure Brief, a weekly dispatch from Swift Signal Digital for AI native founders navigating the 2026 resilience landscape. I'm your host. Every week, we deconstruct the gap between automation claims and regulatory reality. On today's briefing, our analysts dive into the latest FSC mandates and the tactical shift toward outcome-based governance. Let's head into the lab.
So I want you to picture a crime scene.
Okay.
But instead of, yellow police tape or chalk outlines on the pavement and detectives bagging physical evidence, you are staring at a glowing terminal.
Right. Filled with lines of Python.
Exactly. Python, neural network weights, sprawling API call logs. Because, a few years ago, if a software company made a critical error, regulators would just walk into your corporate lobby with a clipboard.
Oh, yeah. They'd sit in a conference room, politely ask to see your data privacy policy.
Check a few boxes.
Right. Review some compliance checkboxes, and maybe hand your legal team a moderate administrative fine. It was all just an exercise in paperwork.
It was static. But today, the game has fundamentally changed. If your artificial intelligence system hallucinates a defamatory claim about a public figure, or, if it leaks a Fortune 500 client's proprietary financial data.
Or if it systematically biases a massive corporate hiring decision.
Yes, exactly. Those regulators, they are not asking for your policy document anymore. They do not care about your corporate value statement.
Not at all.
They are demanding the digital equivalent of a microscopic autopsy. They want to see the exact immutable forensic trail of how a specific mathematical calculation was executed inside the black box of your algorithm.
Millisecond by millisecond.
Right.
The shift we are witnessing right now is just violent, and it's absolute. We have officially moved away from the era of, trust us, our tech is safe.
Yeah, that's so.
To a brutal new era of, prove it to me mathematically, layer by granular layer, embedded directly into your system's infrastructure.
Wow.
The entire technology sector is being forced to pivot from operating on assumptions to operating on absolute verifiable evidence.
Well, welcome to a special edition of the show. We are framing today's deep dive as an exposure brief.
It's a critical one.
Very critical.
Uh-huh.
So if you are an engineering lead sitting in a morning stand-up right now, realizing your product roadmap feels suddenly outdated.
Or if you're a VC trying to figure out which startups in your portfolio are suddenly massive legal liabilities.
Right. Or even an enterprise executive deploying software across a global workforce. Consider this your macro stage briefing. We are essentially putting on our Wall Street tech analyst hats today.
Because the high-stakes landscape of artificial intelligence has violently shifted beneath our feet.
It really has. This third week of March 2026 will go down in the history books as the exact moment the regulatory pivot became a concrete reality.
The grace period is over. For the past 3 years, the industry has just been swimming in theoretical white papers, voluntary commitments, aspirational guidelines.
Yeah, it was all theoretical.
That was the warm-up. What dropped this week represents hard, actionable, and punitive enforcement.
So our mission today is to tear through a massive, honestly imposing stack of breaking legal forecasts, parliamentary votes, and highly technical frameworks that have all dropped essentially at once.
There's a lot to process.
We are synthesizing the Baker-Donaldson 2026 AI legal forecast, the latest geopolitical analysis from Pinsent Masons, the newly finalized technical implementation guidelines from the Cloud Security Alliance, and breaking paradigm-shifting news straight from the floor of the European Parliament.
And when you lay all of these incredibly dense, disparate sources out on the table and connect the dots, a single undeniable core premise emerges.
Which is?
The era of aspirational AI guidelines, that cozy era of checkbox compliance where a legal team could just draft a nice terms of service and call it a day, is dead.
Completely extinct.
Completely. The new, non-negotiable survival standard for the entire software as a service industry. The baseline requirement, just to keep your doors open, is something we call forensic accountability.
Forensic accountability. That is the phrase of the year.
Absolutely.
And it's the lens through which we are going to view everything today. The compliance clock has been reset.
Yep.
Regulators, insurers, enterprise buyers, they are no longer asking if your AI is compliant. The burden of proof has shifted entirely onto your shoulders.
They are demanding you prove your compliance forensically, through your code, through your continuous audit logs, and through your fundamental system architecture.
Right. But before we start analyzing the global chessboard, we need to ground this in reality. I hear the term forensic accountability, and it sounds like I don't know, a slick piece of consultant jargon designed to sell expensive compliance software.
Sure, it can sound like that.
What does this actually mean in practice on a random Tuesday for a mid-sized tech company?
Well, it means that ignorance is no longer a legal shield, and the algorithm is a black box is no longer a valid excuse in a court of law.
Wow. Okay.
Let's break down the mechanics. Forensic accountability requires an unbroken, mathematically immutable chain of evidence for every single autonomous decision your system makes.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine you're a SaaS provider offering an AI-driven triage system for a healthcare network.
High stake.
Very. If that system hallucinates and tells a patient to ignore stroke symptoms, resulting in catastrophic harm, you cannot stand before a judge and say, well, the underlying large language model we licensed from a third party generated a hallucination. We couldn't control it.
Oh, man. Yeah, that defense is dead.
It is dead. Forensic accountability requires your system architecture to automatically log the exact prompt that was input, the specific safety guardrails that either triggered or failed, the specific weights and parameters of the fine-tuning data you utilized to customize the model.
Wait, down to the weights.
Yes, down to the precise millisecond the output was generated. It is about observability at a code-level depth that most companies currently just do not possess. You have to build systems that are inherently auditable by hostile, highly technical third parties.
So, to use an analogy, it is no longer enough for an automaker to build a really fast, really efficient sports car.
Right.
The regulators are saying that before you can even put that car on the road, you have to build an indestructible military-grade black box flight recorder into the dashboard.
Yes, exactly that.
A box that logs every single microsecond of the engine's performance, the driver's inputs, the environmental conditions. And if you crash, that box better tell the investigators exactly why the brakes fail.
That captures the burden perfectly.
Yeah.
But you aren't just building a flight recorder. You are building a recorder that has to survive hostile cross-examination by a federal auditor.
Or a cyber insurance adjuster.
Right. And the reason this is causing outright panic in the C-suites of tech companies right now is that different jurisdictions around the world are demanding entirely different types of flight recorders.
Which brings us to the first massive geographical shift in our briefing, the European Union.
The EU.
They realized you cannot regulate the math if the foundation of the enforcement is broken. We need to look at what just happened on March 18th in the EU Parliament.
Breaking news.
They adopted what is being called the Digital Omnibus on AI. This is a massive piece of breaking news because it introduces a highly controversial strategic stop-the-clock mechanism.
Yeah, the EU AI Act has been this looming regulatory leviathan for years.
Everyone's been terrified of it.
Everyone in Silicon Valley and London has been terrified. But this omnibus vote represents a shocking injection of pragmatism from Brussels. They are officially delaying the regulatory obligations for the most high-risk AI systems, the ones they classify under Annex 3.
Annex 3 systems are the heavy hitters. We are not talking about AI that generates marketing copy.
No, not at all.
We are talking about AI deployed in critical national infrastructure, biometric categorization, educational scoring, employment filtering, essential public services, law enforcement.
Order management.
Right. The original compliance deadlines were aggressive, designed to bring the hammer down quickly. But with this omnibus vote, the EU is postponing the activation of these specific rules.
So what's the new timeline?
For the systems listed in Annex 3, the new hard deadline is December 2027.
Okay.
And for AI systems covered by other sectoral safety legislation, think things like AI embedded in medical devices, aviation tech, or even toy safety, the deadline is pushed way out to August 2028.
They're also extending the deadline for providers to comply with the strict watermarking rules.
Right, I saw that.
The requirement that any AI-generated audio, video, or text must clearly and permanently indicate its synthetic origin that's been pushed to November 2, 2026.
Let's view this through a macro-strategic lens. Why did the EU, a governing body that has aggressively prided itself on being the world's first and strictest AI cop, suddenly hit the brakes?
It's a good question.
From a pure market perspective, this is not a retreat. It is a highly calculated survival move to avoid an absolute avalanche of litigation.
In a catastrophic supply chain disruption that would have crippled the European digital economy.
Exactly. The political ambition of the legislation just outpaced the physical reality of the infrastructure. The law was written, but the machinery to enforce it simply does not exist.
Yeah, the European AI office looked at the calendar and realized they had to prioritize process over speed.
Tell me about the notified bodies, because that's the bottleneck, right?
Right. The EU AI Act requires companies building high-risk systems to get those systems audited and certified by independent organizations called notified bodies.
Okay.
Think of a notified body like a UL safety inspector for consumer electronics. But instead of checking if a toaster catches fire, they are checking if an algorithm discriminates against minorities.
Makes sense.
The fatal flaw in the timeline. These notified bodies don't exist yet in anywhere near the capacity needed to handle the volume of software in the market.
Wow.
Furthermore, the granular technical standards that these bodies are supposed to measure against the actual mathematical definitions of what constitutes safe AI haven't been finalized by the standards organizations.
So if the EU had forced the original deadline, thousands of global software companies would have had to pull their products from the European market overnight,
Exactly.
simply because they couldn't get a mandatory inspection from an inspector that doesn't exist.
It would have triggered a massive economic cell phone. Europe would have essentially disconnected itself from the global enterprise software supply chain.
That's wild.
But we need to apply a harsh, technical, realist perspective here. For any developer listening, do not misinterpret this delay as a free pass to ignore European compliance.
Yeah, that is a dangerous assumption.
Very dangerous. The stop-the-clock mechanism only applies to those specific high-risk categories in Annex 3.
Right.
The overarching framework is still moving forward. While Annex 3 is delayed, the foundational obligations for general-purpose AI models, the GPAI tier, are fully active as of August 2025.
Yes, that's happening.
Oh, it's happening. If you are a massive tech company providing a foundation model, you already have to publish detailed, highly scrutinized summaries of your training data.
But what about the downstream users, the smaller guys?
This is the crucial part for the broader market. Downstream users of these models, the thousands of SaaS startups building apps on top of these foundation APIs, are fully on the hook right now.
Wait.
You have to ensure that your application is not utilizing prohibited technologies. For example, untargeted facial scraping from the open internet, or the mass ingestion of CCTV footage to build facial recognition databases that is outright banned today.
Right away.
If your SaaS app utilizes the third-party API that relies on that kind of prohibited tech under the hood, you are in violation right now. There is no delay, no grace period, and no stop the clock for the bans.
I want to make sure the structural reality of this is perfectly clear to you guys listening. This is not a delay of the entire project.
Yeah.
Imagine a city building inspector who orders a pause on the construction of a massive skyscraper's penthouse because the city council hasn't finalized the fire suppression codes for the top floors yet.
Good analogy.
That makes sense. But that same inspector is still standing in the lobby demanding that the concrete foundation pass inspection today. And if they find out you poured illegal substandard concrete for the foundation, they aren't going to wait for the penthouse rules.
They will bulldoze the entire site right now.
Exactly.
The foundational bans are the concrete. The high-risk Annex 3 categorizations are the penthouse. You still have to survive the lobby inspection.
So looking at the global chessboard, does this strategic delay actually give American and UK developers a meaningful competitive edge? Or does this fragmented timeline just muddy the waters so severely that nobody knows how to build a unified product for the European market anymore?
I mean, it creates a bifurcated nightmare for global product and engineering teams.
A nightmare.
Yes, it gives US and UK developers breathing room to figure out their European deployment strategies without the immediate threat of catastrophic revenue percentage fines for their enterprise systems. But you now have to maintain a multi-track development roadmap.
Right.
You have one engineering track dedicated to the August 2025 GPAI transparency rules, another track desperately trying to figure out the cryptography for the November 2026 watermarking rules, and a completely separate compliance architecture being built in the dark for the December 2027 high-risk deadlines. It requires incredible engineering discipline and massive capital expenditure to manage that kind of regulatory fragmentation without slowing down feature development.
Which perfectly transitions us to our next major strategic shift.
The UK.
Yes, the UK. The EU is hitting the pause button because they realize you can't regulate the algorithmic engine if you don't have the tools to measure it. But just across the English Channel, the United Kingdom looked at that exact same problem and realized the issue isn't the engine at all.
No, it's the raw fuel powering it.
Right. If we can't perfectly audit the math of the algorithm, let's purify the data it consumes.
The UK is bypassing the mathematical complexity of the model and focusing entirely on the provenance of the training data.
This is a massive policy pivot regarding copyright and AI training. For the last several years, there was a prevailing aggressive tech bro ethos in Silicon Valley.
Move fast and break things.
Exactly. If data was visible on the open internet, it was free to scrape. It was the ultimate move fast and break things approach applied to global intellectual property. But the UK government has officially stepped in and violently killed that approach.
They have comprehensively rejected the concept of broad opt-out models and have struck down the proposed text and data mining, or TDM, exceptions for commercial AI development.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that, because the implications are staggering. Previously, the major AI labs argued for an opt-out model. Their legal stance was essentially, we are going to deploy web crawlers to scrape every image, article, and dataset on the internet unless a creator explicitly embeds specific code or a robust robots.txt file saying, do not train on this.
Which placed the burden of protection entirely on the victim.
Exactly. The UK has reversed that polarity. Training an AI on copyrighted data without an explicit, proactive, negotiated license is now a high-risk legal violation.
Yep.
The opt-out era is over. You have to opt in with a checkbook.
Which triggers an immediate existential crisis for anyone building a foundation model. I mean, a large language model or a diffusion-based image generator is a ravenous engine.
It's hungry.
It requires petabytes, sometimes exabytes, of data to function. The model learns by consuming volume. If a government suddenly makes the entire open internet legally radioactive, how do you fuel the engine without getting sued into oblivion by a coalition of publishers and artists?
And that is where the UK is doing something genuinely innovative, moving beyond just punitive regulation into market creation. They are launching what they call the Creative Content Exchange.
This is huge.
It's a highly anticipated pilot program launching January 30th, 2026, slated to run for 1 year. It is designed to be the ultimate structural fix to the data crisis.
The Creative Content Exchange is envisioned as a trusted, centralized, government-backed marketplace for selling, buying, and licensing digitized cultural and creative assets. And they are seeding this marketplace with the absolute highest tier of data available on the planet.
We are talking about the motherlode of clean, pristine data. The UK is unlocking the digitized assets of massive, historically significant public institutions. The National Archives, the Natural History Museum, the British Library.
And crucially, the crown jewel of data.
The BBC.
The BBC. The inclusion of the BBC is the tectonic shift here. To understand the gravity of this, you have to look at how the science of AI development is fundamentally changing.
Right.
The old paradigm, the era of building GPT-3 and the early iterations of Midjourney, was entirely about the quantum of data. The strategy was brute force. Scrape the entire open web, ingest all the garbage, the toxic Reddit threads, the biased forums, the heavily copyrighted news articles.
Vacuum it all up.
Exactly, and rely on the sheer mathematical volume to smooth out the noise and make the model smart. But the industry has hit a mathematical wall with that approach. The new paradigm requires the quality of data.
We are seeing the limits of volume. Researchers are warning about model collapse, right?
Wow.
If you keep training new AI models on an internet that is increasingly filled with synthetic AI-generated garbage, the models degrade. They become stupider over time because they are essentially inbreeding data.
This synthetic data loop is a massive problem. If you want to train an advanced AI to understand nuanced human conversation, accurate historical context, or high-level scientific reasoning, you cannot train it on random blog posts or social media feeds anymore.
No.
You need expertly curated, fact-checked, high-fidelity information. The BBC possesses nearly a century of immaculately structured, high-quality broadcast data, flawlessly transcribed interviews, and rigorous journalism. By placing this archive on the Creative Content Exchange, the BBC transforms from a broadcaster into a SaaS company's absolute best friend.
Wow.
It offers a safe harbor of clean, legally licensed, premium training data.
A safe harbor. If you procure your training data from the exchange, you have forensic accountability baked into the very DNA of your model. You can prove to any hostile auditor, any cyber insurer, or any judge exactly where the data came from, who owns it, and that you hold the cryptographic legal right to utilize it.
You are severing the legal risk at the absolute root of the supply chain. You aren't trying to filter out copyrighted material after the model is trained. You are ensuring the model never sees unauthorized material in the first place.
So let's pivot and look at the so what for the people actually making the content, the human creators. This pivot to a licensing model is fundamentally about fair remuneration and enforceable rights.
Definitely.
We have to look at the mechanics of the major lawsuits dominating the headlines to understand why this is necessary. Take Getty v. Stability AI. This wasn't just a theoretical copyright debate. Stability AI's diffusion model scraped millions of images from Getty's proprietary database.
Right.
The smoking gun in that case was that the AI was generating novel images that literally hallucinated a corrupted version of the Getty image's watermark across the center of the picture.
It's unbelievable.
The model had ingested the watermark so many times it thought it was a fundamental feature of a professional photograph.
It's crazy.
Or look at the New York Times v. OpenAI, where the Times proved the model could regurgitate premium paywalled articles verbatim. These are massive, costly, multi-year legal battles requiring armies of lawyers.
Absolutely.
The UK's exchange creates a marketplace with an agreed, transparent pricing structure. It completely removes the crushing burden of litigation from smaller creators. If you are an independent investigative journalist or a freelance digital illustrator, you do not have the millions of dollars or the decade of time required to sue a $2 trillion tech giant for scraping your portfolio.
No, you don't. The exchange allows those smaller, vulnerable players to pool their assets, attach standardized metadata to their work, and achieve a fair market value without ever having to file a brief or set foot in a courtroom. It monetizes the right of publicity and copyright at scale.
But I'm going to push back hard on this utopian vision.
Okay, let's hear it.
Put yourself in the shoes of a small SaaS developer right now. Imagine a lean startup with 5 engineers sitting in a co-working space in London.
Right.
They're trying to build a highly specialized AI agent for, let's say, parsing complex legal contracts or medical records. They do not have the multi-billion-dollar war chest of a Microsoft, an Anthropic, or a Google. If the UK government forces everyone into a strict creators-first model where every single byte of training data must be formally licensed and paid for through this exchange, doesn't that accidentally price startups entirely out of the market?
That's a fair question.
Are we essentially pulling up the ladder and cementing a permanent oligopoly for the tech giants who already have the cash reserves to afford massive licensing fees?
Look, that is the most potent criticism of the strict licensing model, and the fear of regulatory capture is very real. However, if you look at the architectural blueprint of the Creative Content Exchange, it is actually engineered to mitigate that exact monopoly risk.
Why so?
Because it is a centralized, government-backed pilot. The mandate is to establish standardized, progressive pricing tiers based on a company's usage, compute scale, and revenue.
Yeah.
It is explicitly designed to level the playing field by acting as a single, trusted aggregator.
Okay, I see.
Imagine the alternative. Without the exchange, a startup would have to hire a fleet of expensive IP lawyers to negotiate individual, bespoke data licenses with 1,000 different publishers, newsrooms, and artists.
That would be impossible.
The legal friction alone would bankrupt them before they trained a single parameter. The exchange replaces that bespoke, prohibitive legal friction with a streamlined digital marketplace. A startup can go to the exchange and purchase a standardized data package tailored to their seed stage budget.
So it essentially acts as a legal API for data procurement. You plug in your credentials, pay the transparent, tiered rate, and your model ingests perfectly clean, legally insulated data.
Exactly. It transforms an unpredictable existential legal risk into a highly predictable, manageable operational expense. It makes data procurement look like AWS cloud hosting.
It's a fascinating structural approach to the intellectual property nightmare. But while the UK is trying to solve the economic friction of copyright and data fuel, the United States is attempting to solve a much, much more volatile issue.
Here we go.
The U.S. isn't just looking at the data. They are diving headfirst into the ideological neutrality of the AI output itself. And this brings us to the most legally complex, technically demanding, and frankly explosive regulatory framework of the entire year.
Massive.
Now, before we get into this, I need to state this incredibly clearly to you listening. The framework we are about to discuss is politically charged. It is the U.S. Trump America AI Act. Now, neither of us endorses or opposes the political viewpoints contained in this bill.
Right.
Our sole objective today is to impartially analyze the technical and strategic implications of the proposed legal framework, exactly as outlined in the source material. We are looking strictly at the code and the compliance, nothing else.
We're looking strictly at the mechanics. We're analyzing what the architecture must do to survive a federal audit under this proposed framework, plain and simple.
Exactly. So the Trump America AI Act is a comprehensive legislative framework released as a discussion draft by Senator Marsha Blackburn. The macro strategy driving this bill is federal preemption.
Which is huge.
Right. Currently, the U.S. operates under a chaotic, contradictory patchwork of state laws. You have Colorado passing robust consumer protections, Utah focusing on transparency, California pushing for aggressive safety mandates, and Texas doing something else entirely. This act is designed to take a sledgehammer to that patchwork and override it with one unified, dominant federal rulebook.
Which, from a strictly operational and engineering standpoint, is something the tech industry has been desperately lobbying for. Attempting to build a single software product that simultaneously complies with 50 different conflicting state AI laws is an architectural nightmare.
Sure.
A unified federal standard is highly desirable.
But the actual content of this proposed federal rulebook is what makes it so revolutionary. The framework is built around protecting what they call the 4 Cs: children, creators, conservatives, and community.
Let's walk through them.
Let's break down the macro implications of each before we dive into the deep technical weeds. First, protecting children. This act would place a strict, codified duty of care on AI developers to prevent foreseeable harm to minors. But the massive structural earthquake buried in this section is the sunsetting of Section 230.
Whoa. Sunsetting Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act wouldn't just affect AI, it would fundamentally rewrite the physics of the internet.
It would change everything.
Section 230 is the foundational law that currently protects tech platforms from being held legally liable for the content their users post or generate. If AI developers and the platforms hosting them are suddenly held strictly liable for the outputs their systems generate or facilitate, the risk models for every SaaS company on Earth change overnight.
The framework also folds in the principles of the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, requiring platforms to exercise reasonable care to mitigate specific harms like severe harassment, the promotion of eating disorders, or mental health crises. It also outright bans product research and algorithmic testing on children under 13. Then you have the second C, creators. This section integrates the NO Fakes Act, which establishes strict federal liability for producing or distributing unauthorized digital replicas of an individual's voice or visual likeness.
This is a direct federal response to the deepfake epidemic and the right of publicity, which has historically been a very messy, state-by-state tort issue. It gives human creators a federal weapon against unauthorized AI cloning.
The third C is protecting communities. This is fascinating from a physical infrastructure perspective, moving beyond the code.
The power grid.
Exactly. The Act recognizes that generative AI requires a staggering, unprecedented amount of electricity. It directs the Department of Energy to force massive data center operators to enter into binding agreements that protect local residential consumers from catastrophic energy rate hikes caused by the massive power draw of these AI facilities.
It is a profound acknowledgement that the virtual, cloud-based algorithm is inextricably tied to the physical reality and limitations of the local power grid. You can't train a trillion-parameter model without draining the local reservoir for cooling and maxing out the municipal substations.
But it is the final C that represents the heaviest, most complicated lift for SaaS companies and AI labs, protecting conservatives. The framework seeks to codify an executive order designed to explicitly prevent woke AI in the federal government.
Okay.
It mandates that any large language model procured, utilized, or funded by federal government agencies must be truthful, neutral, and entirely free of ideological biases. Furthermore, it mandates rigorous third-party audits to prevent any algorithmic discrimination based on political affiliation or religious belief.
And this is where we have to stop reading the political summary and put our technical realist hats firmly on.
Right?
Because this specific requirement introduces a staggering, borderline impossible engineering challenge. The technical mechanism required to prove compliance with this mandate is something the industry is calling neutrality logs.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of a neutrality log. I am going to push you hard on the technical reality of this because it sounds great on a legislative whiteboard, but incredibly difficult to execute in a Python script.
Oh, it's brutal.
We know exactly how to audit a corporate financial spreadsheet. A transaction either occurred or it didn't. The debits equal the credits. The math is deterministic.
Yes.
But how do you mathematically prove to a skeptical federal regulator that an AI's refusal to answer a prompt was based on objective technical safety rather than ideological censorship?
It's the multi-billion-dollar question.
Right. If a user prompts a government-procured LLM to write a controversial essay defending a specific political ideology, and the model outright refuses to generate the text, is neutrality actually technically provable in the architecture we use today?
answering that requires a deep dive into how modern LLMs actually process language.
Yeah.
You have to realize that a large language model does not understand politics, ideology, or human intent.
It's just math.
It doesn't have beliefs. It understands vector embeddings.
Mm-hmm.
When you type a prompt, the model converts your words into a complex, multidimensional mathematical map, a vector embedding, based on the statistical relationships between words it learned during training.
Okay.
When a model refuses a prompt, it doesn't do so because it was offended. It refuses because a specific safety guardrail was triggered. Modern models utilize a secondary layer of code, often trained using RLHF reinforcement learning from human feedback.
I've heard of that.
Right? Human raters train a secondary model to act as a filter, scoring the AI's proposed output against a list of safety criteria. If the output's harm score crosses a specific numerical threshold, the system triggers a canned refusal response.
So it hits a mathematical tripwire based on how its human trainers weighted certain topics.
Exactly. The human trainers inherently impart their own biases, or the corporate biases of the AI lab, into those RLHF weights. Now, under this proposed federal framework, if a government auditor comes knocking and asks why a specific political prompt was refused by your API, you cannot just shrug and say, the model felt it was inappropriate, it's a black box.
Because that's a failure of forensic accountability.
An immediate catastrophic failure. To mathematically prove ideological neutrality, you must produce granular, immutable neutrality logs. You have to provide the exact forensic audit trail showing the specific system prompt, the exact parameters, the specific weights in the neural network, and the precise mathematical score that triggered the RLHF guardrail.
Wow.
You have to prove mathematically that the guardrail was triggered by an objective, politically neutral standard, like a predefined filter against inciting physical violence or generating illegal material, and not by a hidden algorithmic bias against a specific political keyword or viewpoint.
So you have to completely deconstruct the black box, freeze time, and show the underlying math for every single sensitive or refused interaction.
Yes, you must be able to forensically recreate the exact digital environment and mathematical state of the AI at the precise microsecond the refusal occurred. And you have to prove that the exact same mathematical standard is applied equally to a prompt from the far left as it is to a prompt from the far right.
That is wild.
It requires a level of algorithmic transparency, logging infrastructure, and storage capacity that most companies simply do not have built into their systems today. Building a model that is smart is hard. Building a model that can constantly forensically explain its own math in real time is exponentially harder.
That sounds like an overwhelming, potentially paralyzing burden for developers.
Yeah.
But here is the brutal strategic reality. It is not just the federal government or political actors demanding this kind of forensic proof.
No, it's not.
The free market is already enforcing it right now, with lethal efficiency. While we debate federal law, the cyber insurance industry has quietly stepped in and is fundamentally changing what it means to be a viable SaaS company.
The insurance sector is often the quietest, but arguably the most ruthless and effective regulator in the entire technology ecosystem. They don't care about politics. They care about actuarial risk.
Which brings us to the SaaS survival standard and the massive, unprecedented crackdown we're seeing from cyber insurers. Major carriers, the heavyweights like Chubb, Travelers, and Beasley, are tightening the screws dramatically in 2026.
They are terrified.
They have run the actuarial models, and they are terrified of the unbounded risk profile of generative AI. We are seeing the rapid rise of a terrifying new industry term, forensic denials.
Oh yeah, forensic denials. That is an insurer's legally bulletproof way of saying, we are not paying out your $10 million data breach claim because your system architecture was fundamentally negligent and uninsurable.
Let's walk through a highly realistic, terrifying scenario. Let's say one of your mid-level employees is using a third-party AI tool to summarize some rough meeting notes from a client call.
Happens every day.
They are rushing, so without thinking, they copy and paste the entire transcript into the prompt. But those notes contain highly sensitive, personally identifiable information, PII. Maybe it's a list of client names, their unencrypted social security numbers, or confidential M&A financial data.
A disaster waiting to happen.
The moment they hit enter, that data leaves your secure, encrypted corporate server and flies into the public cloud of an external AI provider. That is a massive, actionable data breach.
Yep.
When the client finds out and sues you, you go to your cyber insurer to cover the legal damages. The insurers just send a forensics team to look at your system architecture. If they see that you allowed raw, unscrubbed data to flow directly from your employee's keyboard into a third-party LLM without an interception layer,
They will issue a forensic denial. They will argue you failed to meet basic security standards, and they will leave you to pay the settlement out of pocket because you failed to implement the most basic architectural guardrails.
wow.
And this is where the C-suite of every single SaaS company needs to stop worrying about the theoretical laws of 2028 and pay close attention to the how of 2026. How do you prevent a forensic denial?
How do you do it?
The technical solution that insurers are effectively mandating for coverage is the immediate deployment of local redaction layers.
Break that down for us mechanically. How does a local redaction layer actually function within the stack?
Think of it as a highly sophisticated localized mailroom clerk with a black marker.
Okay.
Naturally, deploying a redaction layer involves integrating a sophisticated NER model. NER stands for Named Entity Recognition. Before an employee's prompt ever leaves your company's secure local perimeter, it is intercepted and forced through this NER layer.
It doesn't even get to the internet yet.
Exactly. The NER model scans the text, utilizing pattern recognition and deep semantic analysis to identify highly sensitive entities, human names, phone numbers, credit card details, medical record numbers, or proprietary internal project code names.
It hunts for the radioactive material in the text.
Yes. Once the NER layer identifies those entities, it physically scrubs them. It replaces the sensitive real-world data with a generic cryptographic token.
Give me an example.
So the sentence, John Doe's social security number is 123455678, is intercepted, scrubbed, and becomes username 1's social security number is SSN Tokina.
Oh, that's smart.
This sanitized, scrubbed prompt is what actually gets sent across the internet to the third-party AI API. The LLM does its complex reasoning, generates a summarized response based on the generic tokens, and sends the answer back to your server.
And then what?
Then your local system takes that response and seamlessly resubstitutes the real data back in, replacing the tokens with John Doe and the real member before presenting the final answer to the employee's screen.
So the third-party AI does all the heavy cognitive lifting, but it never actually sees the radioactive PII, while the employee still gets a perfectly useful, highly personalized output.
The sensitive data never physically leaves your protected perimeter. And crucially, from the perspective of forensic accountability, the NER layer automatically generates an immutable log proving that the redaction occurred successfully.
Here's the log again.
Always the log. If an insurer audits you after a scare, you can pull the logs and mathematically prove that you sanitized the data before it ever hit the cloud. You eliminate the breach vector entirely.
But this raises a broader question of systemic trust. How do you prove to an enterprise client, a cyber insurer, or a federal regulator that your entire sprawling system, your NER redaction layers, your neutrality logs, your RLHF training protocols, your risk assessments is actually up to par?
It's a lot to prove.
Right. Because right now, as we've established, the EU is delaying its technical benchmarks, the UK is focused on data licensing, and the US is just proposing political frameworks. In this chaotic vacuum, what is the actual tangible standard a company can certify against today to prove they aren't negligent?
That is where the international community has coalesced around a single lifeline, IIS 42001.
ISO 42001.
It was officially published in late 2023, but 2026 is the year it has exploded to become the absolute, non-negotiable gold standard for AI management.
The Cloud Security Alliance is heavily emphasizing this in their new guidelines. ISO 42001 is acting as the ultimate presumption of conformity.
Yes.
If you can survive the grueling audit required to achieve the certification, regulators, judges, and insurers will generally presume you are operating with reasonable care, even while the specific local laws are still in flux.
It is the first comprehensive international standard specifically designed for artificial intelligence management systems, or AIMS. It is not a suggestion. It is a rigid framework that includes 38 distinct AI-specific controls.
38 controls.
It forces a company to prove, with documentary evidence, that they are actively managing the algorithmic transparency, the continuous accountability, the bias mitigation testing, and the data security of their AI tools throughout the entire end-to-end lifecycle of the system, from initial data collection to model retirement.
Now, a lot of our listeners, especially the executives and founders, are intimately familiar with other major compliance frameworks like ISO 27001 or SOC2.
Right, the classic.
These are the badges of honor every B2B company displays on their website. How is ISO 42001 fundamentally different? Why can't a company just point to their SOC2 report and say, hey, our servers are secure, we're good?
It is a critical, often misunderstood distinction. Let's use an analogy. Think of your software platform as a house. SOC2 and ISO 27001 are fundamentally about information security management.
Okay.
They're entirely focused on the locks on the doors and the bars on the windows of the house. They prove to an auditor that unauthorized people cannot break into your database. They cover data encryption at rest, employee access controls, and network firewalls.
Standard security stuff.
But neither of those frameworks cares about what is actually happening inside the house.
Yeah.
You could have a perfectly secure, mathematically locked down server running an AI model that is systematically making deeply biased, racist hiring decisions or hallucinating dangerous medical advice.
Yikes.
A SOC2 audit would pass you with flying colors because the server is secure. ISO 42001 would fail you instantly.
Oh, I see.
ISO 42001 doesn't care about the locks on the door. It cares if the AI living inside the house is secretly building a bomb in the basement. It explicitly interrogates the AI's behavior, its data provenance, its bias testing methodologies, its drift over time, and the human oversight mechanisms governing its outputs.
So 27001 protects container, while 42001 evaluates the intelligence, the ethics, and the safety of the machine operating inside the container.
It measures the minds of the machine, not just the vault it sits in.
I want to jump in with this strategic so what here, the real ROI of undertaking this massive compliance burden. Because I know that listening to a detailed breakdown of ISO audits, local redaction, mailroom clerks, and vector embeddings can sound like nothing but a massive, soul-crushing drain on a company's operational expenditure.
Sounds expensive.
But the strategic reality we are seeing in the market is the exact opposite. This isn't just about building a legal defense shield, it's about aggressive, offensive market positioning. The data from the 2026 forecasts is clear. Pacesetter companies, the ones that are aggressively adopting ISO 42001 first, rather than waiting for a mandate, are seeing a 27% higher efficiency in their enterprise sales cycles.
It functions as a massive, unassailable competitive moat.
It is the ultimate differentiator. When you are a SaaS company trying to sell your product to a Fortune 500 bank, a major healthcare provider, or a defense contractor, their procurement departments are utterly terrified of AI risk.
Sweating bullets.
If your competitor walks into the pitch meeting and hands them a slick marketing brochure full of buzzwords about their revolutionary AI capabilities, and you walk in and hand them a certified, independent ISO 42001 audit proving your forensic accountability layer by layer,
You win the multi-million-dollar contract.
you instantly bypass 6 months of agonizing back-and-forth security questionnaires because you possess validated third-party proof that your system is safe. In 2026, rigorous compliance is no longer a tax on the business. It is a massive revenue accelerator.
It transforms the concept of trust from a flimsy marketing buzzword into a hard, quantifiable, and bankable asset.
Which brings us to our final and perhaps most crucial segment. All of these technical layers we've discussed, the localized NER redaction, the grueling ISO audits, the intricate mathematical neutrality logs, they are all building toward a revolutionary new legal concept that is taking effect at the state level right now.
In Colorado.
Yes, and this legal concept might serve as the ultimate blueprint for SaaS survival moving forward. We need to look closely at what is happening in Colorado.
The Colorado AI Act. It is scheduled to become fully effective in 2026. And it represents a fascinating, highly pragmatic compromise between fostering technological innovation and enforcing strict regulation.
It really is a masterclass in modern legislation. Colorado is demanding heavy, rigorous compliance. Mandatory, ongoing algorithmic impact assessments, robust internal risk management policies, and extensive public disclosures for any systems deemed high risk.
It's strict.
Furthermore, they are granting the state attorney general exclusive sweeping enforcement authority, but tucked deep inside the mechanics of this legislation is something incredible. It's what the legal analysts at Baker Donelson are calling the relative fault peace treaty.
This concept fundamentally changes the existential liability calculus for developers and deployers of AI. It is a lifeline.
Let's explain how that works mechanically. Usually in traditional product liability law, if a product breaks and hurts a consumer, you deal with the concept of strict liability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If a company manufactures a lawnmower and the blade flies off under normal use and injures a consumer, the manufacturer is generally held strictly liable. The mere fact that the lawnmower exploded is proof enough of a fundamental defect.
Right.
But generative AI is fundamentally different than a lawnmower. An AI system is non-deterministic. It is stochastic. It evolves. It learns dynamically. And it responds to infinitely unpredictable, often adversarial user inputs.
It's a living system.
If we forcefully apply the old laws of strict liability to generative AI, the entire industry would freeze. Nobody would ever build or deploy anything, because it is mathematically impossible to predict or prevent every possible hallucination, edge case, or toxic output in a model with a trillion parameters.
So how does Colorado solve this paralyzing legal trap?
Colorado offers an affirmative defense. The law essentially says, if you, as a developer or a corporate deployer, can conclusively prove that you complied with a nationally or internationally recognized risk management framework, like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework or the grueling ISO 42001 standard we just discussed, then you are legally granted a rebuttable presumption of reasonable care.
It's a peace treaty. The state is saying, if you show your work, if you open the black box, if you prove your forensic accountability and demonstrate that you tried your absolute best to build a safe system, the regulators will treat you as a responsible partner who made an unfortunate error.
Rather than a negligent corporate criminal.
Exactly.
It legally shifts the dynamic from apocalyptic strict liability to manageable relative fault. If your enterprise AI makes a biased lending decision, but your legal team can immediately present the forensic logs showing you conducted rigorous impact assessments, you deployed NER redaction layers, and you followed ISO standards to the letter,
The court will recognize that you exercised reasonable care.
you will absolutely still have to correct the error, and you may face some remediation costs, but you avoid the catastrophic punitive damages that would otherwise bankrupt and destroy your company.
This is a massive paradigm shift. It creates a tangible, existential incentive for companies to embrace these heavy auditing frameworks immediately. But I want to take this concept of relative fault and apply it to the absolute bleeding edge of the industry.
Okay.
The Baker-Donaldson legal forecast highlighted a specific, rapidly approaching frontier that is keeping general counsels awake at night in a cold sweat: agentic liability.
Autonomous agents. This is the moment where the technology crosses the Rubicon. It moves from being a passive tool you consult for advice to an active entity that executes decisions on your behalf in the real world.
We aren't talking about a helpful chatbot writing a draft of an email for a human to review and click send.
No, not at all.
We are talking about true agentic AI. Imagine an AI system that is given a live API key, unfettered access to your company's corporate bank accounts, and the legal authority to execute multi-step workflows entirely autonomously.
That's terrifying.
Imagine a Fortune 500 company deploys an AI agent tasked with optimizing their global cloud server costs. It has the authority to spin up massive server clusters, shut down legacy systems, negotiate pricing, and digitally sign new binding vendor contracts to secure better computing rates.
It operates completely independently in the background, making thousands of micro decisions a second.
Now, what happens if that autonomous AI agent hallucinates? What if it misinterprets a complex, multi-tiered pricing structure, executes a massive, highly disadvantageous financial transaction, and autonomously locks your company into a 10-year, non-refundable cloud hosting contract that costs you $80 million?
Ouch.
The Baker-Donaldson report explicitly notes that, to date, courts have not issued definitive, binding rulings allocating liability for fully autonomous financial agent behavior. So when the bill comes due, who pays? Is it the SaaS company that originally developed the underlying agent framework? Is it the enterprise that integrated and deployed the agent? Or is it the vendor who accepted the AI's digital signature as binding?
It is an absolute terrifying legal vacuum. Traditional human agency law, the centuries-old laws that govern what happens when a human employee signs a bad contract on behalf of a corporation, is being stretched to its absolute breaking point.
I can imagine.
If a human employee goes rogue and signs a disastrous deal, the company can fire them, sue them for breach of fiduciary duty, or attempt to void the contract by claiming the employee acted outside the authorized scope of their employment. But how do you legally prove an AI acted outside its scope when its scope is determined by billions of opaque, constantly shifting neural weights? How do you sue a math equation for breach of duty?
This scenario is exactly why forensic accountability is the only viable life raft for the enterprise sector. The strategic takeaway here for any organization listening is urgent and immediate. You must pull and review your vendor contracts today. Every SaaS agreement, every terms of service, every API integration needs to be forensically audited by your legal team to ensure that your indemnification clauses specifically and explicitly address autonomous algorithmic actions and AI hallucinations that result in direct financial loss.
You cannot afford to wait.
You cannot afford to leave a multi-million-dollar liability up to a confused judge in 2028 who has to decide who is at fault for what your AI agent did in 2026. You have to allocate that risk in the hard text of the contract right now.
And beyond the legal text, you must aggressively demand that your vendors provide the technical capability to log those agentic decisions. If an AI agent executes a stock trade or signs a procurement contract on your behalf, the vendor must be able to instantly provide the immutable forensic log showing the exact step-by-step chain of mathematical logic that led to that autonomous action.
If they can't.
If they cannot provide that level of observability, you should sever the integration. You should not give their agent access to your systems, period.
It all comes back to the log, the unalterable proof of the decision. As we begin to wrap up this exposure brief, I want to summarize the incredible, complex journey we've just taken across the global regulatory landscape. We started by looking at the European Union, which recognized the immense physical difficulty of technical benchmarking and strategically delayed its high-risk Annex III enforcement to avoid breaking the global tech ecosystem.
But importantly, they maintain the immediate foundational bans and the strict transparency rules for general-purpose models.
Right. We then looked across the channel to the UK, which is tackling the raw fuel of AI, the copyrighted data itself, by aggressively killing the opt-out model and launching the Creative Content Exchange. By leveraging the BBC's massive, pristine archives, they are creating a legal safe harbor of clean, structured data.
Systematically shifting the entire industry's focus from the massive volume of scraped internet garbage to the high fidelity of licensed quality data.
Then we confronted the volatile U.S. landscape with the Trump America AI Act, which seeks to preempt chaotic state laws and protect the 4Cs, ultimately forcing developers to confront the staggering, perhaps impossible engineering challenge of maintaining granular neutrality logs to mathematically prove the absence of hidden ideological bias.
A challenge which is being massively compounded by the cyber insurance industry's ruthless demand for local redaction and sophisticated NER layers to intercept data leaks before they happen.
And finally, we saw how grueling ISO 42001 certification provides a vital presumption of conformity, leading directly to the Colorado Relative Fault Model, a legal peace treaty for those who can prove their diligence, shielding them from the terrifying, uncharted legal vacuum of agentic liability.
The through line connecting all of this is absolute and undeniable. Checkbox compliance is extinct. Whether you are navigating the delayed strictness of the EU, licensing archival data in the UK, satisfying the actuaries at your insurance carrier, or deploying autonomous financial agents, your survival depends entirely on building forensic accountability deep into your code.
You have to be able to show your mathematical work at the molecular level. But before we sign off, I know you have a final forward-looking thought on where this regulatory arms race is inevitably heading. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about how humans, the federal regulators, the state attorneys general, the ISO auditors, the cyber insurance adjusters are going to enforce this forensic accountability.
Right.
But as we transition from chatbots to autonomous agentic swarms, you see a massive paradox emerging.
I do. Consider the exponential trajectory we are currently on. AI models are becoming orders of magnitude more complex every few months. We are rapidly moving from single-turn user prompts to agentic swarms ecosystems where thousands of AI agents are constantly communicating with each other, negotiating contracts, and executing billions of autonomous micro-decisions across the global economy every single day.
It's mind-boggling.
The sheer volume of data, the microsecond speed of the transactions, and the incomprehensible complexity of the neural pathways are already pushing the absolute limits of human cognitive comprehension.
It outpaces our biological ability to monitor it.
Exactly. So we have to ask ourselves a profound structural question. Are we inevitably going to reach a tipping point where human auditing becomes physically and mathematically impossible? Wow. You cannot put a team of 50 human lawyers and data scientists in a conference room and ask them to manually review the neutrality logs of 1 billion autonomous financial transactions that happen in the span of an hour. The sheer scale of the machine breaks the human capability to govern it.
That's a chilling thought.
So, what is the ultimate logical outcome of this 2026 regulatory pivot we've discussed today? it is highly likely that the only possible way to enforce AI regulation at scale will be to build highly regulated, incredibly powerful auditor AIs.
Artificial intelligence systems whose sole legally mandated purpose is to constantly police, probe, and forensically interrogate other AI systems on our behalf.
We are building a future where the regulator is an algorithm. We will have to train sovereign AI models to deeply understand human law, to ingest massive exabyte-scale forensic logs in real time, to detect the subtle mathematical emergence of bias or the failure of a local redaction layer, and to autonomously issue legal compliance warnings or even unilaterally shut down rogue corporate systems.
The AI police.
The ultimate enforcer of human law upon artificial intelligence will have to be artificial intelligence.
Wow. An ecosystem of hyper-intelligent machines constantly auditing and policing other machines, all operating at the speed of light just to keep the human peace. That is a heavy, incredible thought to leave on. Thank you to everyone who joined us for this incredibly dense deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
As you close out this session, go back to your desk, look at your own organization, your own sauce stack, and your own code base. Remember that crime scene we talked about at the very beginning of the hour? The chalk outlines are gone, the regulators, the insurers, and soon the auditor AIs have the forensic tools. The era of the black box is over, and the only question you need to ask yourself today is this. If the regulators come knocking tomorrow, can my code mathematically prove its innocence?
You've been listening to The Exposure Brief. If today's analysis highlighted a gap in your own product's liability surface area, don't wait for the audit. Head over to theguardrail.beehive.com to join the community and get our weekly audit checklists. And for a private diagnostic of your narrative risk, visit swiftsignaldigital.card.co. Stay secure.